Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome to a new ForoCompetencia breakfast. It is the last one for this year, and we have today with us Ori Schwartz, who is the head of competition at the OECD, and he's going to be presenting today a report that has just been released last week and that I recommend you get it on the website of the OECD because it is a decade of the different annual reports that the OECD has done in about how competition trends are developing in all over the world. So Ori, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Julian. Very happy to be here and to present the report. Maybe I can start by briefly presenting myself. I'm Ori Schwartz. I've been heading the competition team in the OECD for the last 4 years. I did most of my career before that in the Israeli Competition Authority. I was the acting Director General and Chief Legal Counsel. As you can see on the screen, with 2 colleagues from the OECD, Paulo Bunha, which I guess all of you know or should know, who was basically our person for the Latin American region, was also heading our center in Lima, and Aura Garcia, that on top of being from the region, is heading our statistics team. And basically, I'll be mostly presenting today work that she was responsible for, and she should feel free to intervene and correct me whenever necessary. So I will share my screen now, if you don't mind. Because I have some slides, although I must say, from my side, it will be much better to have a conversation. As you can see from the findings that I will present, things are happening. We've identified some very interesting trends in competition enforcement globally. I will try to also mention occasionally unique trends for Latin America. And yeah, I would be very happy kind of share what we have to say, but also to hear from you, kind of your perspective from the region. So just making sure that you can see my slides. Okay.
Yes.
So perfect. So the competition trends report that I'll present today
we
is
can
basically
see the presenter mode. Sorry.
We
are seeing the presenter mode of the slides.
Oh. How do I change that, Laura?
On top where it says display settings.
Sorry. Display settings. Sorry, please excuse me for a second. Okay, perhaps I can just do it like that. If it works for you, can you see the slides?
Yes.
Okay. So apologies. So this report was launched last week at the OECD Global Forum on Competition. And what is special about this report is that for the first time it covers data from 10 years, looking 10 years back. So basically data from 2015 until now. And before we go into the details, I can perhaps provide a bit of background on the report. This initiative started at 2018, And we've published a 6-yearly edition, and then the last one that covers all years between 2015 and 2024. We also published throughout the years 2 regional reports, one for Latin America and the other one for Asia Pacific. We have now data from more than 65 jurisdictions. So for us, we're not just covering OECD data. We are also covering data received from other countries outside the OECD. I must say that in the past, we used to have more than 70 countries, but jurisdictions, sorry, not just countries. We are also receiving information from international organizations, international agencies or multinational agencies that do competition enforcement. But we at some point decided perhaps to strengthen the qualitative aspect of the report and not necessarily push for more jurisdictions, but to ensure that we have the data in the quality that we need. What is the data that we gather? So basically, we are asking competition authorities to provide us with data related to enforcement. So as you'll see later in the presentation, but data on cases that they do, mergers that they review, decisions that they get with respect to mergers, cartel investigations and cartel decisions, and fines and abuse of dominance decisions. We also collect data on the more kind of institutional aspects of competition authorities. For example, data on staff members, number of staff members doing competition enforcement, on resources. What's basically to get a sense what's going on with competition authorities' budget throughout the years. Why this is, I should say, we do not publish individual data. Although we have the individual data, we publish aggregated data. This was the mandate that we received from the competition committee at the OECD. With the one exception, mergers. In case of mergers, we do publish individual data. But the idea is that basically first, it allows everyone to get kind of a general perspective on where competition enforcement is going in terms of global trends. We often, when presenting the information, present it separately for OECD and non-OECD jurisdictions. Again, to make sure that we're comparing apples to apples, as economists like to say. And also, it can be useful for the individual competition authority who may want to measure itself in comparison to other competition authorities or to global trends in competition enforcement, and obviously every authority has its own data, and then it can compare it to global trends. So as I was saying, the recent report, the report from last week, is covering 10 years of data, and I think should allow us to get a pretty good sense of where competition is heading, where it was, and the direction that it has taken. One thing I should say that we do not cover in the report is the reasons for trends. So we display the data, we describe the trends that we see, but we do not go so much into the reasoning of the different trends that we're seeing. We have done it in the last report to a very limited extent, and I will say a few words about that, especially since the trends that we've been seeing recently are particularly interesting and intriguing and raise some, I think, questions that deserve further discussion. So, sorry. Sorry, I'm experiencing some technical issues, so please forgive me. Sorry, apologies. So before moving forward, I just like to ask if there to open the floor for questions, if there are any. Due to the technical issue that I'm experiencing, I can't see if there are any hands that are being raised. But as I said at the beginning, it would be great to have this more of as a conversation rather than a presentation. So I see that Esteban has a question, so please go ahead.
Yes. My question is if is it possible to open or deaggregate the Americas statistics, because in under the title Americas is this is that aggregated data from US, Canada, Mexico, and all Latin America. I think it will be useful if we can have this both or these two regions, Latin America and maybe North America, or something like that.
Well, thank you. That's something that we've been been asking ourselves. Well, of course, we have the data, but as I was mentioning, we are obliged to keep individual data confident. And if we split the data in this way, then we leave the other group, may leave the other group only with the US and Canada, which is what might raise an issue from their side. In the past, I don't think in Aura, correct me if I'm wrong, we used to have the group in the past, we used to publish more regional data. And we treated this region as part of the Americas, as you were saying. The reason why we do it less recently is that we came to the conclusion that I think Latin America is a very good example. Latin America is a very heterogeneous region when it comes to competition enforcement. And it is often the case that when we see trends in Latin America, these trends are being led by very, very few agencies in the region. And so we thought that saying things are in Latin America go in a certain direction might be a bit misleading, because one major jurisdiction or two major jurisdictions can greatly influence the direction that the region is taking, although it's not actually the region which is taking this direction, just one jurisdiction or two. So this is why we stopped doing that. But if it's, again, we have the information and we can't publish it that way. This is not exactly what you were asking, but I thought just to mention that, since if it is relevant, it is useful, you can always feel free to reach out to us. We have the data and we'll be happy to share it with you.
I think that it will be useful. It's true that although in Latin America we have a great variety of countries with different sizes and different economies, population, etc. There are some common patterns that allow certain to speak about Latin America as a region that has its particularities, and it has a big difference with vis-a-vis the development of antitrust and among other things with regard to the US and even Canada. So I think that if you have the information and I think that it will be interesting to see how the region has evolved in the past decade, because I think that there might be results that differ from what is going on perhaps in the northern hemisphere.
Okay, we can definitely do that. And by the way, when I'll go through the different competition areas, I will mention also the Latin American trend. By the way, as you will see, the Latin American trend is not very different compared to the global trend. It's more or less the same. But I'll be happy to go into more details on that, and Aura can definitely complement me throughout the way.
Perfect. Do you want me to share the screen?
I know I asked Aura, and Aura will do that kindly. Thanks, Aura.
Can you see now?
So, yeah, perfect. So perhaps to set the scene before going into the numbers again, we need to think when we think 10 years back, things have happened. Of course, competition enforcement is not isolated from other international developments, and things that we think might influence competition trends is first the pandemic. We'll soon go into we'll start with the merger data, and you'll see that the pandemic had a very significant influence on mergers, the mergers notifications more generally. I would dare say that even on investigations, of course, things were simply more complicated to do at the time, and competition enforcement, like many other areas, was influenced. Then inflation, the post-pandemic inflation, competition authorities in some regions experienced pressure from policy makers to focus more on cost of living issues. This also might have had influence on the directions the trends are going. And finally, the things we've been seeing fairly recently is the tensions across regarding trade policies, tariffs, which also perhaps it's too early to say at this point, but may also influence the direction of competition enforcement trends. On the bottom of the slide, you'll see developments that are more connected, perhaps directly. I mean, developments within the competition sphere. Again, starting with mergers, we saw, again, we try to compare where we are today compared to 10 years ago, the rise of killer acquisition as a concern, a major concern in competition enforcement. Of course, it has to do also with the bigger trend, focus on digital markets. As we'll see, I'm kind of anticipating the surprise, but we'll see that there is some decrease in number of cases, and perhaps we see more and more authorities doing cases in digital markets. I think this trend is very relevant also to Latin America. I particularly remember that during the last Latin America competition forum that we had in Asunción recently, there was a session dedicated to digital cases, as indeed it seemed that many Latin American countries, more than I have thought, I must confess, are doing digital cases. And digital cases have this tendency to be more complicated, to take longer, and of course, require more resources. And then finally, another trend that we've been seeing is more active enforcement in what we call here non-traditional markets, like labor markets and environment-related markets and data-driven markets. Or all these changes may also play into the different trends of competition enforcement. So now perhaps we can go to the next slide. All right, can we move to the... Okay, so as I said before, now it's a kind of in a more orderly manner. These are the factors that we've been gathering. So more on the institution and the institutional side, as I was saying, in our view, is just as important as the actual enforcement side. Of course, enforcement is heavily influenced by the resources available to an authority in terms of budget and staff. And then your traditional enforcement areas, so cartels, abuse, merger, as we'll see later, also market studies, advocacy. So really try to kind of catch everything a competition authority is doing. Also because, as you'll see, when we sometimes see a decrease in one place, we may see an increase in another place, perhaps implying that resources were shifted from one area to another area. And we can go to the next slide. So starting with some key numbers, just to give a sense, these are the number of mergers that you see on the upper left side of the upper left side of the slide. These are the number of mergers that were notified in countries that reported to us their merger numbers during these 10 years. Budgets, and this is very interesting. Budget, we see a global increase of 4% in competition authorities' budget. Of course, I should say that might be an important methodological question. When we talk about budget and we talk about staff, the data that we ask for and that we collect is budget that is allocated and staff that is allocated to competition enforcement. Of course, some authorities have, all authorities have administrative staff. Some authorities have additional responsibilities on top of competition. Some do consumer protection, some do IP, some do have other responsibilities, but we make sure to focus only on the competition-related resources. And just to give a sense, this is the number, 65.5 billion euros is the total number of fines imposed during these 10 years in competition cases. So quite an impressive number, especially if you compare it to the overall budget of competition authorities. The surplus is definitely a positive one. So maybe something to pitch for governments. Sorry, let me stop here before we move on and ask and just open the floor in case there are questions. Okay, then perhaps we can move on. And okay, now we get to the real trends, and we are starting with mergers. So these are kind of global numbers, merger notifications per year from 2015 till 2024. And as you can see, I think it's very interesting to see first the increasing numbers mergers which are being notified. It can result from growing activity within the global economy. It can also be the result of not adjusting merger thresholds. So with inflation, in real terms, merger thresholds might decline, and then more mergers are being notified. And then you see the big decline in 2020, the year of the pandemic, that had also, of course, significant influence on economic activity that was translated into the number of mergers. But interestingly enough, you see that 2021 and to some extent 2022 more or less compensate for the declining numbers in 2020. And then if you look at the 2024 numbers, it seems that you can sort of ignore 2020 and 2020, the data between 2020 and 2023, and you'll see an ongoing trend. Basically, in 24, things sort of went back to normal, and the curve that we've been seeing till more or less 2019 is just continuing in 2024. Will be interesting to see, of course, the trends for 2025. I should say that in this, maybe going back to the questions that I was asked earlier, same trend more or less is true for Latin America. So, and curve is going up, and then we see decline 2020, and then compensation in the 2 following years, and now things seem more or less to go back to normal. It would be interesting to see, on the other hand, of course, the potential influence of the trade wars. There the openness of different countries to engage in mergers and acquisitions, to invest abroad, and so on. But for now, it seems that things are, back to normal, so to speak. Next slide is focus on merger decisions. And here, again, you see in blue, we have a number of prohibitions. We're focusing mainly on prohibitions. And and you can see clearly that the trend here is also going up. So it seems that competition authorities are being more interventionist than they used to be. Having said that, if you bear in mind the overall number of mergers, you see that prohibitions still play a relatively small role in merger decisions. The number, if I'm not mistaken, 2024 is just below 40. So this is just below 40 mergers globally that were prohibited, which is much higher than 2015, if you compare, which then it was just below 10. But in terms of real numbers, it's still quite low. I should say again, 2024 was also a peak year for prohibitions in Latin America. There were 5. So out of these, I think 37 or 36 prohibition decisions, 5 come from Latin America. But the trend overall, these 5, again, is a record number for the region compared to previous years. So again, Latin America is more or less aligned with the global trend of increasing number of prohibitions. Yes, I see that there's a question, please.
Yes, hello. No, I have a question related to how you compute the number of prohibitions. For example, if a merger is prohibited in more than one country, do you count it as one prohibition or you count it as 2 or 3 prohibitions? If the same merger is prohibited in different countries.
Well, I think that we count it as one, but I let Ara respond because this is something that she knows far better than me. So Ara, please go ahead.
Sure. No, because the report comes directly from the competition authorities, is one prohibition per authority. So if it's the same merger, it would be counted according to the number of authorities that prohibited that transaction. So these 5 could even be 1 in the region. Yeah.
So you count it as 2 or 3. If the same merger is prohibited in 3 counties, you
Yes.
count it as 3 prohibitions. Thank you very much.
Maybe just to explain the rationale behind it, we measure the activity of activity. First, I should say practically, and I'm not telling you anything you don't know. Of course, it's often the case when an international merger is being notified.
¿No te vas a comer el otro?
Sorry, this was not okay. Then when it seems that the merger is going to be prohibited, then it's usually common that after one prohibition, the merger is being withdrawn in other jurisdiction. But at the same time, since there was a competition authority issued a prohibition decision, we count it as one decision, even if another authority issued a similar decision on the same merger. Any other questions?
Yes, please.
Sure.
Do you these statistics, which are extremely interesting, they cover full prohibitions and not divestitures, no other structural remedies, right? Do you have any idea what the numbers look like for structural remedies?
Ara?
Generally, like ballpark.
We do have statistics on remedies, but the competition authorities do not discriminate for us the share between structural and behavioral remedies.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, if there are no further questions, we can move to the next slide. And here we're focusing on market studies. And something that I think was much now has become completely standard for most competition authorities, but it was not necessarily the case, definitely not 20 years ago. This currently most competition authorities are dedicating a significant part of their time and effort to market studies. You can see here the kind of the bottom line in terms of market studies that were conducted between 2015 and 2024. I think we are now more or less in a stable phase of market studies. We don't see any significant decreases or increases. Market studies have been integrated into the day-to-day life of competition authorities. We do have here, as you can see, kind of the leading sectors where market studies are taking place. So these are retail, trade, manufacturing, and information. On average, a competition authority globally does 3 market studies per year. However, I should say that for Latin America, and here there's a slight difference between Latin America and the rest of the world. In Latin America, it is 2 market studies per year, so slightly less. But I would dare say that even for Latin America, for now, competition authorities, market studies are completely streamlined, also completely mainstreamed. They are part of the day-to-day work of every competition authority, perhaps recognizing the kind of the power of softer influence or talking to other parts of government on promoting competition. Let's move now to the next slide. Yeah, and this is I think very interesting. So these are enforcement decisions. Cartels in blue, abuse or unilateral conduct in red. And well, I'll be stating the obvious, I guess, if I would say that the trend here is a declining one. By the way, on both, as you can see, on both abuse and cartels. It seems that this trend started before the pandemic. So even though we saw a kind of a modest recovery post-pandemic, the decline in general cannot or should not be associated with the pandemic. As I said at the beginning, we to explain the potential reasons behind these trends, we would have to do research that we're not currently doing, but at the same time, we took the liberty to propose potential reasons for this decline, maybe as a way to stimulate more research on the matter in the future. And of course, here, each one can have his or her views. One potential reason can be extending the portfolios of competition authorities. So they do more soft advocacy activities, which are not visible in the data. We talked, I think it's not necessarily relevant here, but COVID-19 may have had influence, at least partially. We see here, and we don't have a slide on this, but leniency globally is declining. So perhaps in the context of cartel enforcement, authorities that tended to rely heavily on leniency do not see the same cartels number as they've seen in the past. A fourth potential explanation can be the increased complexity of cases. Simply doing a competition case might be more difficult, more complicated, take more time and more resource than what used to be the case 5 or 10 years ago. So even though we've seen a moderate increase in resources, we don't see the same, this increase is not sufficient to compensate for the increasing complexity of cases. We can perhaps add in this sense, perhaps the increasing procedural burdens that competition cases bring with them. If we talk, and this is just from informal and not very scientific conversations with officials from competition authorities, but it seems that they think that they are now being subjected to much more scrutiny in terms of the process they need to go through to get an enforcement decision completed. And finally, and this could also be, this can also explain some of the reason for the decline. It's simply that deterrence is working better. It doesn't have to be a negative explanation. It also could be a positive explanation. Competition authorities are doing well in deterring against anti-competitive behavior, and the market is kind of getting the signal that competition authorities are trying to convey. I see that there's a question, so we pause for a minute.
Thank you.
Please.
Thank you, Ari. One off the cuff reaction and a question. All your potential explanations make a lot of sense to me. Maybe increase deterrence a little bit less, but let's be hopeful. I'm wondering, though, tackling this from a slightly different perspective, whether the numbers we saw, let's say from 2012 to whether the numbers from 2012 to through 2018 were not, in fact, outliers, because we had auto parts, and we also had in Brazil the car wash Lava Jato cases. So taking these from the statistics, I wonder whether the numbers that we would see would not be would be as different as they are. And my off the cuff reaction would be, if I were to guess, that the numbers would be still lower, but not as lower, and then the potential explanation would account for the rest, particularly maybe decline in leniency applications.
That's definitely a possible explanation. As I said, I mean, yeah, the numbers don't say much beside themselves. They don't provide any additional explanation to just show us what is being reported by competition authorities. If I can develop this in a sense and say that, of course, one case is not similar to another case. Some cases are big, are influential, are material. They have also a significant deterrent effect. Others are smaller, not as important, not as effective, and we would measure two such cases as one and one. So the numbers here do not show the significance or the size of a case. Having said that, since this gathers information from 10 years and thousands of decisions, I think there are good reason to believe that there is a kind of a declining trend. And again, there can be many possible explanations for such possible trends, and I hope that at some point we can delve deeper into the numbers, also gather qualitative information and try to come up with more, to make some sense, to understand the sense behind these numbers. Perhaps before moving forward, I should say that the trend in Latin America is no different. It's not exactly the same, but overall, generally speaking, we see a decline in number of cases also in Latin America.
Can it also be already that there is an increase in damages cases, that the cost of a damage claim is much higher of the benefits of leniency application?
Well, it's interesting that you say that, because when we had last week a short discussion in the competition committee of the OECD about these findings, immediately from the floor, not from our side, from the floor, so from competition authorities, this was the explanation that was provided. Now, we do not gather information about private enforcement, so I cannot say whether this is being complemented by an increase in private enforcement. We simply do not know. But I wonder, and I mean, we tend to look at private enforcement as complementary to public enforcement. So, and one that is coming on top of the public enforcement, not instead. So, in theory at least, and perhaps this is something we need to think a bit more about. In theory, an increase in private enforcement should not lead to a decrease in public one.
But it does. At least this is what I've talked with different lawyers, mainly in Europe, and they had cases where they recommended their clients to file for leniency, and the benefit they got from leniency was hugely less significant than the cost.
I see what you mean. Okay.
That the client had to pay on and never-ending damage claims.
Yeah, so this is perhaps what you're saying is more directly connected to the decline in leniency. We had looked into the decline of leniency 2 years ago, I think was the last time, and we did go into this potential reason for the decline of leniency, and indeed with the introduction of private enforcement, leniency typically does not provide protection from damages claims. Yeah, that can definitely be it, but it can explain, I think, mostly the leniency part.
But
and it definitely cannot explain, or it probably cannot explain the abuse part of the decline. Okay, if there are no further questions, we can move on. So this is the other side of the story. Resources. As you can see, so in terms of budget, competition authorities' budget is increasing. I would dare say, significantly. Again, it's hard to say whether it's increasing in real terms in the following sense. When you talk with competition authorities, they will often highlight difficulties in hired, trained and skilled staff members, perhaps particularly, I would say also lawyers as well as economists, but recently with many authorities trying to hire data scientists, this is also an issue. And perhaps you need to compare these numbers with numbers that the alternative salaries that staff members can get in the private sector. So if salaries are increasing in the private sector, perhaps what may seem like a impressive increase in resources is not necessarily sufficient to compensate for the lost alternatives that lawyers and economists working at the competition authority may have. The bottom graph shows the changes in staffing of competition authorities. Here again, we see an increased trend. And by the way, I should say it's very interesting to see the trends in resources compared to the trends in enforcement. More resources, at least on paper, but numbers of enforcement cases is declining. So perhaps again, considering the way cases are done today compared to 10 years ago, it requires much more investment on competition authorities' side to have a successful case. Any questions on that? Okay, then that was. Yes, please.
A difference in the case of Latin America vis-a-vis the rest of the world with regard to
correct me if I'm wrong, but there's no difference in the trend. So there was.
In terms of resources, you mean?
Resources, yes.
Yes, budgets increased a little bit more in Latin America compared to, the rest of the world. This is in real terms, so controlling for inflation. But staff increased a little bit less. Although I have to say that, for example, if we look at proportion of cases or proportion of merger activity, Americas is always around 10% of activity compared to the rest of the world. But in terms of resources, and I guess this is because of how big the countries tend to be, they represent around, for example, 30% of the staff working in competition in the whole sample. But in terms of temporary trend, the trends are more or less the same. Of course, there at regional level, there is more variation year by year, but the overall trend for the 10 years is the same.
Thanks. Herman?
Yes, my question was if the total number of competition authorities that you are considering remains the same during the 10 years, or if there is an increase in the number of competition authorities or in the number of jurisdictions.
So
No, it remains. Yeah,
I can start and Aura can add. So the number has increased throughout the years, but when we start reviewing an authority, we always go back, of course, asking for data from 2015. So we make sure that the sample that we have remains the same, that we don't compare 60 authorities now with 20 authorities 10 years ago. And as I was saying, in the past, we peaked with, I think, something which was more over than 70 competition authorities, but only to realize that in some cases, data may raise some question of reliability. So when we had question marks over reliability of data, we preferred to simply remove the relevant jurisdiction until we are certain that the data is reliable. And again, focus more, especially in recent years, on the quality of data rather than quantity of jurisdictions.
But the numbers that you show, the 7,000 employees compared to 9,000 employees, they always refer to the same number of countries, the same number of jurisdictions.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Esteban?
Yes.
Oh, sorry, go ahead, Ori.
No, I wanted to ask Esteban.
No, just to say, because of there was a question. Today, in about 1 hour and a half, the IDB will make public one of their main publications, and in this, this is the DIA publication, Development in the Americas, and this feature or this volume will be about competition and productivity in Latin America and in the Americas. And in this publication, there will be a chapter where we make an analysis of data for Latin American agencies or competition agencies, the OECD, Ori, and all this, the team share with the IDB aggregated data, but with some way to distinguish between high GDP countries and lower GDP countries. So if you want to deep dive more in Latin America statistic, you can see this today, and this will be public in the IDB site.
Thanks. I agree. I heard about this report. I think it should be an excellent one. As you may know, the LACCF is co-organized as a joint venture between us and the IDB, so we work very closely with them. And actually, in the last meeting, we had a session dedicated to this publication. So I agree, it should be very interesting.
I have a question, Ori. Compared to the different reports that you have been publishing over the past 6 years, this time you have you decided to have a much broader spectrum with 10 years. The conclusions of the analysis, have they differed substantially from what you were seeing following each year, or you didn't find substantial differences in by broadening the scope of the analysis.
I think, well, and Ara, please feel free to jump in. I think that we've been seeing these trends developing in recent years. Of course, when you broaden the scope, then things become clearer. But I would dare say that we were not surprised to see the trends that we've been seeing in this report. Things have been going in this direction for quite some time now.
Okay, so there was no specific issue that raised your attention and said by looking at the forest than rather than the set of trees.
No. I mean, it raises serious questions. I think that hopefully we can dive deeper into and try to figure out. Things are changing, and for now, I don't have a comprehensive explanation for these trends. There might be, as we've seen here, I think some of you raised some interesting ideas, but to properly understand what is happening, we need to go much deeper. But clearly, in terms of sheer numbers, we see a decline.
Two questions with regard to what you just said. One is, have you discussed last week at the forum on when we discussed this report? Have you discussed also the reasons behind that, or there was not necessarily a debate on the reasons, or is that something that you plan to do afterwards?
This is indeed something we haven't discussed it. We discussed it very briefly, but I think this discussion we should have more information to feed into this discussion so it's meaningful enough. And this is something we're planning to do, but at this point we don't have, much to say. And I would be, obviously your interpretation of the numbers is just as good as ours. I mean, the numbers are quite interesting and the trends are quite visible. But as for the reason, again, I would be hesitant to say anything concrete or conclusive at this point.
And yes, you have all the data. Obviously, the report includes, as you well mentioned at the beginning, aggregated data. But have you analyzed if you go by regions? Do you see a divergence in the trends, or you see similar trends going on all over the world? This is if you take you gave the consolidated numbers, and that shows a trend, but it's a global trend. If you go deeper into the regions, do you see the same trends taking place all over the world, or you see those trends more consolidated in some regions and not in others?
Well, you have some, in certain cases and certain parameters, you have some outliers. If I'm not mistaken, for example, leniency, the picture is slightly better in Europe compared to other jurisdictions. But overall, the picture is quite, I think, not exactly the same, but the trends are relevant for more or less all jurisdictions. But Aura, please feel free to add from your side.
Yeah, for example, if you go a bit deeper into each of the variables, we do see how in the Americas there has been a recent increase in cartel investigations, for example, but this doesn't translate into cartel infringement decisions. So we do see a couple of changes. Then abuse of dominance decreased in all regions, but perhaps in Americas and Asia Pacific a little bit less than in Europe. So there are differences across the regions, but overall, for example, decisions, which is one of the most relevant variables, presents decrease across the regions. As Ori was mentioning, the same with leniency, downgrade, and so on. The dynamics do change quite a bit in how much they decrease, but overall the results remain the same.
Thanks.
Thank you. If there are no other questions, then all is left is to thank you very much for your time and attention.
Well, we have a tradition that always the guest speaker gives the concluding remarks.
Sure. So I mean, I think I've said all I have to say so far. To me, there are two observations here. First, numbers are presenting an intriguing picture, and as Aura was just underlining, it's a global picture. Perhaps on certain jurisdictions might present exceptions in certain cases, but overall the overall global picture is quite strong. And the big question mark is over the reasons. And I think in this case, at least from those of you who are academics, I think that should be a very interesting research question. What's going on? What are the reasons behind these numbers? Because as in the international competition community, we may be required to take certain steps towards policymakers, towards our governments, parliaments, to make sure that competition laws, the resources, everything still fits for purpose when it comes to competition enforcement. I must say personally, I think Mariana, you mentioned that perhaps increasing deterrence is not the most compelling reason for these numbers. I personally tend to agree, although again, we will have to see. But if it is indeed not the reason, it means that we may have a problem that we're not fully aware of at this point.
I think that this report helps a lot to spell out this issue, and I think that it will be interesting to see how if you keep digging on the reasons, what it will be interesting to see what are the findings of that further analysis. I think that I agree that definitely something is going on. And this report is a very good picture of that. So thanks a lot, Ori, for your time, your presentation, and for everyone. It is the end of this year for ForoCompetencia. So there will be no meeting in January. So happy holidays and a great start of 2026 to all.
Thank you very much, everyone. Thank you for the invitation, and Happy New Year.
Thank you very much. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you, Julian. Bye-bye, everyone. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.